Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fiction genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the Doctor Who Christmas special. A very interesting episode, a very interesting concept episode where it's basically the concept of Doctor Who and Superman joining forces to save the world, essentially. In a weird way, it's like the Doctor created Superman, if you kind of want to break it down like that. Because even Stephen Moffat himself was saying, like, during, like, when he was talking about the episode, about how obviously he wanted to kind of bring those two worlds together, just kind of take those two worlds, but obviously make Superman a little more silly, add the silliness behind it. Like, the fact of the matter is, like, for example, like the whole, like, Grant growing up and not being able to control his powers, having X-ray vision, kind of like being stuck on it, and he can't look at anyone because he'll see everybody naked, just because it coincides with him being a little kid and going through puberty. And then it's just like, oh yeah, but the fact is that you really, really like Lucy. And he's like, oh, how can you tell? And it's like, oh, he's there levitating a little bit just because that's how his powers manifest themselves during his puberty phase, I guess. I guess you could, because you can draw so many different parallels of just, because the show does some very interesting things that I guess you can, like, I don't know, I find it fascinating, like the whole opening act about, like, oh yeah, the fact is that, because the Doctor's looking at the comic, like a Superman comic, say, oh, you didn't notice this? Haven't you noticed? I was like, oh man, something weird's going on with the comic. Are you going to get sucked into the comic book world? Because I didn't really know much of the premise of the episode. I read a little bit of it, which I'll kind of get to in a second, but I was looking at the comic book, it's like, oh man, something going to happen. It's like, oh, what's going to happen here? And it's like, oh yeah, he points out something that everyone knows. It's like, oh yeah, Clark Kent and Superman are the same person. See, I even drew glasses on Superman to prove it. And it's Grant, as a little kid, is like, are you serious? Are you crazy? No, it doesn't. What? Everyone knows that. To me, like, the thing I was about to say is, like, I saw the premise as, like, reporter and a superhero. To me, in my mind, I put it together. I thought it was like a reporter who was, a superhero who's moonlighting, I guess, if it's kind of the proper term, I guess, in that case, as a reporter, which it ended up being not the case. It's like Grant isn't a reporter, he's an nanny, which is which is his own thing, like, I guess it's to make him have an even more mundane job, because if, in this case of Clark's a reporter as well as Lois, so that's kind of one thing that I guess they kind of bond over. But for this, it's like, the fact is, the reason why Grant / the Ghost, and not only is he a nanny, because he talks about the fact that, yeah, you think, like, the Doctor's like, why do you needlessly make your life complicated? He's like, well, it's about to get you're about to see it's even more complicated, because the babies that he, like, kind of babysitting, the kid that he's nannying is actually Lucy's kid, who apparently is a girl he's known for 24 years, who he's had a crush on since he was a little kid. She ended up falling in love with his best friend. They had a kid together. The dad / his best friend ran off. And it kind of leaves him in that awkward situation where he still cares about her and wants to be around her. And the Doctor comments on, so you look after you lost the girl that you had a crush on to your best friend. You stuck around her to take care of a child that's not yours, and so that she could also go out and have dates with other men. And he's just like, yeah. And it's like, do you know? It's like the Doctor was like, do you not see what's wrong with that whole? You do you, I guess. And what I was constantly like is the fact is that how he balances everything, like, because that's something I feel like you don't see too often. From the limited stuff I've seen with Superman, like, I'm not well versed in Superman, but, like, that quick turnaround like they did in this, I've seen it in little stuff here and there. Definitely, most recently, Supergirl has kind of tapped into that in, like, one of its episodes of being like, oh yeah, I'm here being the Ghost, I'm being a superhero. Oh, let me quickly revert to my secret identity. In this case, it's Grant, and just popping up, and she notices, she's like, oh, Grant, oh, you always know when to show up just in time. He's like, yeah. I even love the fact is that when he was calling Lucy as the Ghost, he was in the other room, literally calling her from her own place. And the whole situation of being like, oh yeah, I have a date, and they said it at the same time, and she's like, you have a date? Who is it with? Oh, okay. Oh, you have a date too, yeah. it's a business thing, yada, yada, yada. And then you have the doctor walking up, it's like, she's jealous. And then Grant's like, yeah, but I'm jealous too. And then you're jealous of you. Oh yeah, but technically she's jealous of her too, so she's jealous of herself, which is, like I said, it's such an interesting thing of seeing that, like balancing the fact is that you have to face the fact is that she's jealous of another version of you and whatnot. Also, I love that whole like date scene, especially because like he kept thinking like, because the fact is it kind of clicked in Lucy's head that like, oh, she has she has feelings for Grant, because she kind of admits the fact that she's like, oh, don't talk down to about Grant's job as a nanny. Like a lot of men kind of snicker at it and everything, which, Grant's kind of having a hard time because it's like, I think he's trying to defend himself without defending himself too much, because he has to talk about it from like the ghost perspective. He can't be like, oh, he's like, I'm not trying to put down what Grant does. It's like, obviously, why am I going to put down the job that I do? Like I always have to defend my job to other people, like, me being a male nanny and everything, which there's nothing wrong with, so it's just kind of interesting. And then like he has that moment where he's like trying to he takes off the mask, and in that moment where he touches her to tell her to turn around, but she does, but she turns the other way, doesn't see him and everything. And he goes back and she's got her hand covering her face. She's just like, he's like, I think you should look up. And then she's just like, oh, but Grant, I'm sitting here lying, and Grant never lied to me, never once. It's like, oh, he's a good guy. And then she looks up and he's got the mask back on. I love it. Such a weird and awkward thing that you wouldn't see in a Superman thing. Like I said, it's taking that and it adds a silly element to it. Just love how it all works out. I was thinking with the whole concept of how he got his powers being a gemstone and whatnot, I thought what was going to happen was that, like, as the episode progressed, he'd eventually lose them. But it seems like even at the end of the episode, he still has them, because it eventually melded with his, kind of became a part of his system, because the doctor kept talking about it was going to get flushed out of his system. So I was like, oh, maybe it's going to take a while, but at the end of this, or something's going to happen, and his system's going to get flushed, and it's not going to be in his system anymore. He's going to lose his superpower. That's what was going to happen. I know I've been very focusing on like the ghost aspect of it, which I really appreciate the aesthetic of how that looks. I mean, obviously, literally the ghost is a combination of Batman meets Superman. Obviously, Superman with the powers and everything, but Batman because of the whole aesthetic of the costume. Because even Justin Chapman was talking about how the fact is he wanted to do the character kind of like that. How kind of almost a Superman meets Michael Keaton's Batman, because he does kind of do the Batman thing, or the typical Batman thing of like, oh yeah, he has one voice as Grant, and then he has another voice as the Ghost, where he talks differently and kind of has a more gravelly voice to kind of hide his identity. So, but that was another thing I want to point out, was like comparing like the whole beginning thing with the whole glasses thing about Superman. Kind of comparing that with the whole Grant and Lucy situation of like not being able to see someone. It's like, because even the doctor points out, you're a reporter. You should be able to figure this out. Especially, it's one of those things. It's like when you know the truth, it's obvious, but when you're in a situation, I guess it's a little harder. I mean, granted, his case is a little bit different from Superman's, because Superman, the only difference is is glasses, which is kind of the case with Grant. But I mean, at least in his case of being the Ghost, he wears a mask too. So it's like you wouldn't quickly jump to that conclusion, because it's like, okay, how would you not know Superman is Clark Kent? It's like, obviously they're the same person, but it's like if you as the watcher or reader didn't know that ahead of time. In the doctor's case, he already knows it because he was there when Grant got his power, so he quite easily figured it out. But it's kind of like, would you really be able to tell? Would you be able to think that? Would you be able to be like, oh, it's so obvious? It's like, no, because the whole point is to keep that mild-mannered way of life so that you kind of hide your identity. So, but like I said, I've been one quick note, just because I do this when I recognize actors and whatnot. I kept wondering, like, obviously I knew who Grant was. It's like, oh yeah, Justin Chapman, that's cool. Because it threw me for a loop for a little bit. I was like, oh, you're in this? It's like, because I was like, right. This takes place in New York, doesn't it? Right. Never mind. But then the actress who plays Lucy, I kept going, why do I know you from something? Continuing it's curious. Her name is Charity Wakefield. But every time I was like, why do I recognize you? Where do I recognize you from? And during, the commercial breaks when they're talking about the episode, I heard her talk and I was like, oh, you have a British accent. It's like, oh, you do a very good American accent. I would have never thought you were American, that you were British. But then, I was like, well, why do I feel like I know you? Because especially hearing her voice kind of clicked it more in my head. So I did the normal thing. I Googled her, which thank goodness for Wikipedia. So I just clicked on her Wikipedia page, because Wikipedia serves all my needs of recognizing actors and whatnot. And I happened to notice the thing where I know her from the TV show The Player. It's a very short-lived show that was on NBC. She played one of the main characters. And I think the reason why it didn't click in my head is because in The Player, she does her natural accent. She just uses her natural accent. But in this, obviously, she's doing an American accent. So I think that's what kind of threw me for a loop for a little bit. I just kept saying, I was like, why do I know you? I always hate that feeling when I recognize an actor. I just can't quite place them. But nevertheless, obviously, I spent so much time talking about the superhero aspect. I'm forgetting about the main aspect of the episode being like, oh, essentially there's these sentient brains that are basically come to Earth. They've created this whole corporation known as Harmony Shoal, which is essentially they want to implant themselves into the brains of all world leaders, because essentially the way the Doctor talks about it is they basically came here to colonize. They do this, they jump from planet to planet. And it's very interesting how they operate, because essentially to me, it seems like the most easiest way to recognize them is basically because apparently they cut the skull open diagonally, which is like, why don't you just do it horizontally? But I mean, maybe there's more practicality to that. I don't know, but it's like everyone who's had their brains replaced ends up like having like a diagonal slash on their face. But the fact is, when they open up their skull, the brain isn't there. So it's kind of like, I don't think they really ever explain where exactly the brain goes in their body. Like maybe it starts off at the skull, but then it kind of transfers to the center of the body. I don't know. Especially when you had that dude, Mr. Brooks, when he got replaced, like he opens his skull up and he pulls out a gun, which is like, what's the purpose of that? What's the practicality for that? It's like you could literally put the gun anywhere on your person, but you'd rather open up your skull and put it there. I mean, obviously really the only reason for that is just because it's weird, disgusting, and awesome. I mean, which is the best reason to do anything when it comes to like, writing or designing something. But it's like you literally didn't have to do that, but you did it just for laughs, just because you thought it'd be funny and interesting to do it like that. Which kind of goes inside with my point of like, I guess the brain's not up there. So that was just kind of interesting. I like how it looks. It's so, especially when Mr. Brooks before he got replaced, punched that doctor dude and his face shifted a little bit and he kind of popped it back into place. It's so weird and disgusting. Like I said, but awesome. So I really because I agree with the Doctor. I really like their whole plan of like, okay, you're turning your ship into a bomb. Why would you do that? And he starts breaking it down. I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty genius. Essentially, their buildings, the Harmony Shoal building can withstand, like, I think they said like 4 nukes, which makes the Ghost even more impressive that he was able to break it simply with snapping his fingers, which kind of makes you wonder, like, what exactly is that power? You literally snapped your finger and you shattered a glass, and then just like you snapped your finger and you lit a candle. So it's like, what? I'm sure there's some science behind that in some shape or form. It's interesting. I wouldn't mind diving deeper, but at the same time, I don't need an explanation. I liked how they went down a list of his superpowers, which they got the powers that we are aware of, not any that we're not aware of. I would have liked to hear more stuff, but I guess it's like, if they explain what else he could do, then you'd kind of be like, oh crap, now we have to like, show those powers off, because it's kind of messed up mentioning powers that we never see him utilize, which all the powers he has, we see him utilize. I mean, the only one we didn't really ever see, we heard about, was X-ray vision, but it's kind of been there, done that, so you don't really need to. But essentially the plan is to crash their ship into New York. Basically, that causes a big, stir around the world, because like, oh, aliens are here, and then the world leaders get scared, but then they're like, oh, but the only thing in New York that survived is like, oh, Harmony Shoal. I guess we should go there and take shelter in that building with this whole situation going down. And it's like, oh yeah, now that's the perfect opportunity to implant your brain into all these different world leaders. Like I said, it's a very good plan. I was like, that's very, very genius. Even, like I said, even the Doctor guy in the comment, he's like, I like that plan. It's a very good plan. Why doesn't our side, the good guys, ever come up with a plan like that? There's also that Nardo guy. He's probably been in stuff before, and I just don't remember. Like, I like, my brain is terrible. Like, unless I rewatch something, I tend to forget like details. So it's like, I don't know if this is the first time he's popped up before. It probably isn't, but he's probably popped up before. But it threw me for a loop as to where I recognized him, like whether he's popped up before or not. I don't know. But I really like the whole situation of when they were on the ship and the doctor's opening doors. He's like, should you be doing that? Those guards are still out there. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. The ship is crashing. They're not going to be worried about it. And it starts strangling. He's like, oh, don't worry. The ship will blow up long before you get strangled to death. I also love the fact is when the ship was crashing, Grant kind of had to save the day. He's still trying to hide his identity and everything. And he reveals himself to her. Like he ends up stopping it from hitting with one-handed too. And the moment I saw that, I was like, you're just a freaking show-off. Not two hands, literally one-handed, you stopped it. But then they kind of explained why he did it one-handed, because in the other hand, he was holding the baby monitor. And it's like, okay, that's true to his character. But still, you're such a show-off. It's like, he could have stopped it, like, both hands. But the fact is, he wanted to show, like, that's all that was. That's all that was. It was meant to show off and like, yeah, I can stop with one hand. It's none. I'm pretty awesome. Which I love the fact is that the doctor comments on the fact is, okay, you're flying away, okay, yeah, you're spending your whole time together, you're flying away, kissing and whatnot, that's awesome, but what about your baby that you're leaving down here? A quick side note that I forgot to bring up earlier is just something that kind of clicked in my head, because I kept looking at the actor who plays Mr. Brooks in this episode, kind of like, he's kind of one of the main, bad guys in this episode, obviously, but it's like, I kept looking at him thinking, like, I've seen you in something before, haven't I? I was like, maybe, now I'm sitting here thinking about it. Isn't that the actor who played Guinevere's brother in the show Merlin? I think so. Now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, it looks like that might be him. Just a little quick side note. And also something I completely forgot about talking about earlier. It was actually a cool like Doctor Who moment. Basically when the brain guys are looking at the security footage, it's like, oh, who is this guy? It's like pointing at the doctor, it's like, oh, we should be careful of him. He could be very dangerous and whatnot. And then they're just switching the camera view to the doctor, and all of a sudden he turns to the camera and goes, boo! I was like, what? Wait, what? How did you? And then he tells about, I'm talking to you, I'm here, I'm talking to you live. I was like, that's pretty good. And that was like a really, like, it was pretty good how he did that. Very seamless. But at the same time, I won't lie to you, it also made me jump a little bit too, because it scared me when he went boo. I was like, oh god. I felt like such a punk because that literally made me jump with them too. So, and also another thing was the whole episode, like there was that whole situation of like, oh, the fact is, because Nardo kept bringing it up, the fact is that like the doctors, like, when the conversation gets serious, he always saves the world. That's just his way of avoiding talking about something he doesn't want to talk about. And like the entire time I was like, oh, obviously he's still reeling about the whole Clara thing. But then it wasn't until the end where he mentioned, oh yeah, the one he's worried about, that he was thinking about was River Songs. I'm like, wait, what? I was like, right, the whole Clara thing, you're a freaking idiot. Because he technically doesn't remember Clara. Technically. He remembers her, but just like, she's not as like close, near and dear to him as she was before, because his memories of her are very vague and foggy, so, which is super sad. It's almost like, almost a repeat of the Donna situation, but in reverse, and slightly more depressing. I mean, especially considering Clara's circumstances in the matter, it makes it slightly more depressing, but it's slightly okay because she's off adventuring with Ashinder. I mean, that's what it kind of alluded to. Nevertheless, not the point. So I'm guessing since they're talking about the whole River Song thing, it's like, oh yeah, she died because he's been basically going for like 24 years. I'm assuming that's because he brought up the whole library situation. The whole thing that happened back in season 4, like basically how he actually, the first time the Doctor storyline wise met Rivers, as well as like, it's kind of first and last time he ever met her was there. Well, that's the last time they meet, the whole, in the grand scheme of things, but I'm guessing like her timeline's caught up with her, because basically her death is a fixed point. Like she will die at that library. That's just where it all ends for her. Because that's what makes it so sad, is because like, no matter how much fun, they've had subsequently, anytime they bumped into each other, especially during the Matt Smith days, I really loved the relationship then too. But it's like, well, because I say back then too, but it's like, that's when they really met more often, was back when, like during the 11th Doctor days. So, but at the end of it, in the back of your mind, you always know that is where she will always end up. There's no changing that. So I'm guessing at this point in time, because the Doctor's kind of been worried about it, I guess like it finally caught up with him. It's like, dude, like the Clara situation and now this, I guess is, it's just like a constant reminder that because we haven't seen River Songs in a while, so I was wondering if it's going to be a situation of like, will he come across her at any more points in her timeline, or is this them kind of putting the kibosh on that, being like, nope, there's no more River Song episodes ever, you know? I am curious about that, how that all plays out, but like I said, I guess that it means her, with the progression of time and everything, and progression of the story, like, he's officially reached a point where she dies in that library, so... And he's kind of been dealing with it. So it's obviously, you know, the Doctor doesn't like endings, so it's always hits him the hardest. So, plus we also got a sneak preview of the next season / series, where it's like, oh, you get little peeks at his new companion, Bill. Seems like some very interesting stuff is on the horizon, but I really won't talk about that till the time comes. I'm still not even sure when the series starts. And there's also another series called, I think, Class. It looks like another Doctor Who spinoff, which it seems very interesting. I wasn't expecting it. I was like, oh, what is this? When I was seeing the previews for it, and it's like, oh, the Doctor pops up. I was like, oh, is this another Doctor Who spinoff? The other being Torchwood, obviously, which I still want Torchwood to come back in some shape or form. Especially with the whole, like, Ashinder thing and, you know, Jack thing, you know, both being immortals. And then the way Torchwood ended with, like, you know, I forgot his character's name, but Mekhi Phifer's character technically becoming immortal too. So it's kind of, I mean, the way Ashinder talked about it in the series 9 finale, that basically all the other immortals are dead. She's kind of the only one that was left alive at the end of, like, you know, everything ending. So I know I'm kind of going off book here, but nevertheless, overall a very fun episode, and I really liked it. So I don't know what else to say. I I'm kind of running low on time, so I kind of have to hurry up and finish this. So I'm kind of stumbling around. Sorry, I do apologize. I hate when I feel a little rushed when these type of things, but just the way things are. So, final note though, like, you know, the fact is that main brain guy ended up escaping. Jumped into one of the bodies of the unit members. So obviously that's probably going to pop up sometime during the season, maybe. I would think so. Not unless it's a situation where it's like, oh, that's kind of next Christmas's problem. So I'm very curious to see what they do with it. The Christmas episodes are always pretty good, so I'm very curious. I'm already super interested to see what they do with next Christmas's episode, you know? So, but really, that's all I want to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.